Hello everybody and welcome back to the Galactic Armory. Today we are going to be covering, or should I say recovering, the Boba Fett helmet. I know I already did this one, but I wanted to revisit it with a whole set of different colors, an updated model, and I figured it was time to make a new video on it. This is going to be the Mandalorian Season 2 helmet. There's a lot of discussion now, but it's pretty clear that in the book of Boba Fett, he's using a new model for the helmet, so we're going to be updating that again. But this is still a beautiful looking helmet, so I wanted to go over the colors, exactly how I made it, and exactly how you can do it too. With all that said, let's get right into it. So to begin, this helmet is going to be 3D printed. It uses my own files. Links to both the prints and the files will be in the description. So if you want to follow along and do this helmet yourself, check those out. This is going to take around 60 hours to print at 0.3mm layer height. You could see I have no supports under the dome. Those are not really necessary. The inside will be a little bit stringy, but we can heat that up and press it down with a heat gun. So when that is finished printing, the first thing we need to do is start smoothing it out. So just like the first helmet, we're going to be using the resin smoothing technique to smooth this helmet out to prepare it for painting. Now, if you're not familiar with the resin smoothing method, you basically brush on some UV reactive resin. This resin I actually use in my Resin 3D printers, but you just brush a little bit on over the print itself and then cure it with a UV light of some sort. Here I'm using a UV lamp to actually cure that resin, and it's going to do a great job at filling in those printer lines so that we can later sand it down, so we'll have a smooth surface for painting. Now this technique has a few benefits. Number one, it's pretty quick. The resin will cure almost instantly underneath that UV light. You might have to wash it off a little bit to deal with some tackiness because some of that resin won't be able to cure. If you want, check out this video by Vault Fox. She did a great job at covering exactly why that happens. But in general, this method is a lot quicker than using something like filler primer and Bondo and repeating between those. This acts as a great base layer because this resin is going to cure very hard. It's going to be difficult to sand, but that means that you're not going to be able to accidentally sand away too much very easily. You're also able to put new layers on very quickly. For instance, you can see me put 2 to 3 layers on the very top of the helmet right away. That's because those layer lines at that area are very tall and very high, just because they're like the top of a sphere. Those layer lines are going to be thicker, and we're going to need to put on more resin to cover those up. You don't want to apply too much resin at once. You want to apply it in really thin layers, or else you're going to get kind of an effect where the UV light only cures the top layer and the bottom layer is still that liquid resin and it's going to be trapped underneath, and you obviously don't want that. So apply it in really thin layers and then cure it, and then apply it in more thin layers if you need to. Once we've got 1 or 2 roughly cured layers on the helmet, I like to sit it in the sun just to cook for a couple days. The UV light from the sun is going to ideally finish curing that leftover resin. With the resin cured, it's time to start sanding, and for this, please save yourself so much time and get like an orbital sander of some sort. Here I've got a mouse sander with 120 grit sandpaper on it, which is kind of a rougher grit. You're going to need some rougher grit because this resin, like I said, cures very hard. You're going to need to put some elbow grease into sanding this thing. Luckily, this helmet doesn't have a lot of like recessed, hard to reach areas, so sanding was pretty easy compared to some other helmets. But just go around the entire helmet sanding as much as you can, being careful not to go too far and actually hit the plastic. Once we've done a single go around on the helmet with the sander, what I like to do is dust it off, clean off the helmet of like leftover resin dust, and then we're actually going to hit it with this Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler and sandable. Now this stuff still works very well at filling in some very small micro cuts from the sandpaper, but it's also going to help us identify spots that still need more resin, still need more filling and sanding. So it's going to kind of do 2 things for us at once. I'm going to let this stuff cure for about an hour, and then we're going to apply more resin to the spots that still need work. So the color of the resin that you choose doesn't really make a difference, but in this case I was using like a light gray resin on top of the light gray filler primer, so I couldn't really see where exactly I had put the resin, so I switched over to a black resin. This shows up much easier, and I was able to see exactly where I had laid new resin already. We're kind of just going to repeat the last 2 steps. We're going to sand it, then filler primer it again, just to see if we have any leftover spots. But after that, this helmet should be perfectly smooth and ready for painting. So in The Mandalorian Season 2, Boba Fett's helmet actually has some acid scarring. It appears as little bumps all around the helmet. This is something that looks like it's changed in the book of Boba Fett. But to match that style here, I'm actually going to be applying some truck bed coating over the top of the helmet. This stuff is basically a spray on rubber, but it's going to apply a nice base texture for us. It's going to be nice and lumpy and kind of simulate that acid scarring. You don't need to use a lot to get the effect that we're going with, so I'm just going to be doing a light coating of this stuff. Okay, it is time for the first colors to be put onto the helmet. Links to all these colors will be in the description because it is kind of important that you get the coloring right. These are all going to be Montana Black paints. These are all really great brand rattle cans. I was very impressed with the quality of them. And for the base coat of the helmet, we're going with Montana Black Black Storm. Now, as to why a spray paint would have black in the name and then be a totally different color, I don't know why they went with that, but Storm is the name of the paint that we're going to be going with. Now let's quickly go over the paint for the accessories. First up, we've got Montana Black Cardinal for the rear vents. It's a nice dark red color. Next up, we've got some Manila Green for the left ear. And then for the right ear, we're going to be using some Sahara Beige. I believe Sahara Beige is also used for Shore Troopers, so if you've got a Shore Trooper helmet, you're in luck. You get to reuse some paint. Okay, now getting back to the main body of the helmet, I want to start with the red trim that goes around the face and around the back of the helmet. This is actually the same paint that we used for the rear vents, that Montana Black Cardinal. So the first thing we're going to need to do is tape off all the areas that we don't want this to be red. Take your time with this, make sure your lines are clean and smooth, especially around those front cheek areas. It can be difficult to get the curve exactly right with some thicker tape. If you're able to find any detailing tape that's like ultra thin, that works great for this sort of stuff. So now it's time to apply the Cardinal paint. Just be sure and go over your tape lines before you start painting. Sometimes those edges like to peel up a little bit and we don't want any paint to seep underneath. So once you've checked all your tape lines to make sure that they're still stuck to the helmet, go ahead and apply some light coats around the face and rear of the helmet. So now we're going to need to tape off the helmet again. This time for the rear side of the helmet, it's actually a different shade of green from the rest of the helmet. So just like before, tape off the whole area, make sure your lines are clean, and then we'll apply the paint. Okay, for the rear of the helmet, we're going to be using the Montana Black Celtic. I felt like this color was a little bit too bright straight out of the can, so when we go to weather this helmet, I'm going to darken this side up a little bit. Okay, finally, and this is the last thing we'll have to tape off, is the little under cheeks. It's actually a darker green, so go ahead and tape that off and cover up the rest of the helmet with tape. For the under cheeks, we're going with Montana Black Tag Green. Okay, now that all that paint has finished drying, it's time for one of my favorite parts. We're going to be removing all the tape from the helmet, revealing our colorful helmet below. One last color I want to cover is the top of the earpiece. I'm actually going to be using a satin stone gray for that, and then a satin black for the other earpiece. Next up, I'm going to be adding the kill stripes to the helmet. Now on the first helmet, I actually taped these out and cut them individually, but I like this method a lot better. This is part of that same Boba Fett decal kit that I got from Trooper Bay that included like the armor, mythosaur, skull patterns, and I like this method much better. So I'm just using an X-Acto knife to precisely place all these kill stripes, making sure that they're pretty well stuck in place. Okay, with those things in place, it's time to start assembling the rest of the helmet. Now for that, I'm just going to be using some E6000 to cover those registration spheres with a little bit of glue, and I'm going to be using some tape to hold everything in place while that glue cures, because it's going to take around 24 hours to fully hold. So the tape is there just to make sure nothing moves or shifts while that glue is curing. Same thing with the back vents and the antenna. Be careful not to glue the antenna in place because we actually want that thing to move, so we don't want everything glued in place. So after 24 hours, it looks like our glue is fully cured. We can take the tape off, and the rangefinder still has full range of motion, which is great. Okay, now it is time to start weathering this helmet, giving it a little bit of life, a little bit of wear, because of course we know that Boba Fett gets into some stuff. For this, I'm just using an airbrush with some black paint in there, and I'm just going to touch up the recessed areas with a little bit of black, as well as cover up that back area a little bit more to darken up that green. Because like I said before, I felt like it was a bit too bright. But after a light dust coat in black, I feel like it looks much better. I'm going to give a light dust coat to the rest of the helmet as well, not nearly as much as the back, but enough just to darken everything up. On this repainted Boba Fett helmet, he actually still has some metal silver showing up from below, so it's not entirely scratch free. To get that effect, I've just got a cheap paintbrush. I'm going to spray with some silver spray paint and then lightly touch up some of the hard edges of the helmet around the open visor area and around the iconic dent. Okay, the last thing we need to add to this helmet to complete it is a visor. Now for that, I'm going to be using a Hobart face shield. It's actually like a tinted grinding shield. These are also available on my website if you want to have one yourself. But you're going to have to watch this entire clip because I totally botched this the first time around. So unfortunately, all the face shields have these letters stamped into the top right corner. So immediately I wanted to cut those out because I didn't want any part of those to be on the helmet itself. Then when testing it against the outside of the helmet, I thought it was too small, like it wouldn't cover the entire eye socket. And so I recut a new face shield only to realize that my original face shield actually did fit when I actually put it on the inside. So what I like to do is cut a rough draft of the visor first and then kind of trim it to get as close as we can to the actual shape of the visor with a little bit of extra just for some overlap. We need that overlap because we're going to be applying some steel stick epoxy putty To hold this visor in place, it's a 2-part putty. You just rub it together until it's a uniform color, and then after a minute or so it's going to harden. We're going to be using this to hold the visor in place in around like 4 places. So just mix some putty, use it to hold down the corners of the visor. It's actually going to bind very well to the inside of the helmet since it's 3D printed. It's going to fit very well into those 3D print grooves and lines and provide a pretty strong hold. You might have to hold it in place for a couple minutes while this putty fully cures, but it works very fast, so don't dawdle. So there you go, guys. That is exactly how I made my own Boba Fett helmet and how you can do the same. Like I said at the beginning, the Book of Boba Fett actually uses a different model entirely for the helmet, so I'll probably end up doing this helmet a 3rd time. So I hope you all like Boba Fett content. Until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you again in the next one.